What is up, Chess YouTube? So there's this guy, Magnus Carlsen. You may have heard of him, and he's kind of good at attacking chess. He's kind of really good at attacking chess. But this game that he just played in the Champions Chess Tour against Nodirbek Abdusattorov, I mean, it takes Magnus Carlsen attacking chess to the next level. This game was just absolutely absurd. If you don't watch this game till the end, you're going to be kicking yourself later because this was just some beautiful, beautiful, very instructive chess right here. So in the game, Magnus opening 1d4, and Nodirbek Abdusattorov, his opponent, goes knight f6. Then we have c4, e6, knight f3, and then d5. The good old-fashioned QGD. This is essentially all the rage these days for black against 1d4. Now, here, Magnus plays a lot of knight c3 and a lot of g3, the Catalan, but in this game, he does go knight c3. That is his old favorite move here. Now, Magnus has been avoiding this move as white, mostly because of the move c5 from black, the semi-Tarrasch. And here, Nodirbek does go for that line. So, c5 is played in the game, and now Magnus takes on d5. And the reason a lot of white players don't go for this line here as white is the move c takes d4, which is thought to be pretty solid for black. White still has some ideas there, but black is pretty solid. But instead, in the game, Nodirbek goes for the old main line here in the semi-Tarrasch. That is capturing with the knight on d5. Now from here, both sides follow the absolute main line for many, many moves. Don't worry if you don't know all the theory here. White goes e4, gaining control of the center. And now black takes on c3, sort of in the spirit of the Grunfeld opening. So we have knight takes, b takes. And from here, black's plan is very, very simple. He's going to trade on d4, then go bishop b4, trading off his dark squared bishop, and then castle as soon as he can. So let's see it in action. C takes. So far, so good. Bishop b4 hits the king. Bishop d2 blocks the attack. The best way to do so. Now black trades on d2. White takes back, and then black castles. So why did black do all of this? Well, the idea is, first of all, he's trading off one pair of minor pieces. And black here, he has the better pawn structure in the long term. He has this 2 versus 1 queenside pawn majority, which, if this were an endgame, that could be a huge asset, and black could make a pass pawn on the queen side. However, in the short term, white does have the strong pawn center and good attacking chances on the king side. Therefore, black, he's trying to trade off one pair of minor pieces, which helps the defense, and then castle as soon as he can. And from here, black's plan is pretty simple. Perhaps b6, bishop b7, knight d7, and so on, developing his queenside pieces. So, Nodirbek playing very, very solid so far. Now, Magnus here has a few different ways to position his pieces. Of course, white here is trying to attack on the king side, and the two ways to do it, really, number one, is going bishop c4, castles, rook fe1, rook a d1, and then from there, maybe trying to go d5, attacking in the center. The other idea right now that white can play is the immediate move h4, which looks absurd, but computers show that, I mean, ever since Alpha 0, this move has been propping up everywhere as white in all kinds of openings. And the idea is potentially bringing your king not to g1, but actually to the f1 square, maybe going h5, h6, rook h3, rook g3, pressuring g7, and so on. And overall, it's a very dangerous attacking idea. But in the game, Magnus goes for a third option that you rarely see at the highest level. That is the move rook to c1, sliding over the rook and just developing. Now, white's idea here is typically, instead of bishop c4, actually bishop to d3. That is the idea behind this placement of the rook right here. And now Nodirbek, he goes for a very simple idea of b6, bishop b7, knight bd7, and rook c8. So let's see it in action. Nodirbek, b6, bishop d3, bishop b7, white castles. So far, so good for white. Bishop d3 and castles. And now Nodirbek, knight bd7. And here, black's plan is simple. Rook a c8, trying to trade off more and more pieces. And as more and more pieces come off the board, black should be doing relatively okay in the long run. Now, here, Magnus actually has a pretty big decision to make. Where do you want to put your pieces? And really beyond that, how do you want to continue the attack? Keep in mind, Magnus here, he can't just go, say, rook fd1 and then just try to develop, because he has to have some sort of idea for long-term attacking the black king. Otherwise, these pawns on d4 and e4 could be vulnerable. So where should he put his pieces? Well, it turns out white has a lot, and I mean a lot, of pretty decent playable ideas. For example, rook fd1 or e1 are both playable. You can go h4 here. You can go queen to e3 or f4 here. A lot of ideas are playable, but in the game, Magnus does go rook f to e1. So far, he's got his queen and his rooks on pretty good squares here, but black just goes rook c8, offering a trade of rooks. Now, Magnus here. Actually, the computer shows rook b1 and rook d1 to be the best moves here, but instead, Magnus, he trades rooks, rook takes, then we have queen takes, and now Magnus makes a very typical Magnus move. Just h3, not attacking anything, just offering his king a little bit of space on h2 if it needs it. There will be no back rank mating threats now. And he's just offering black the chance to move. And overall, Magnus here is happy to play a relatively equal position, provided black doesn't have this exact position, previously studied in his notes. So, all right, Nodirbek, h6, kind of a similar idea, guarding g5, giving the king some space on h7 in certain lines. Now, Magnus, a4, switching over to the queen side. So, Magnus may be going a5 here, trying to soften up this queen side pawn. Black goes queen c7, then rook c1, and then queen to b8. By the way, other squares are playable as well. For example, queen d8 is fine, queen d6 is fine. But in the game, queen to b8, the benefit here, the queen is staying on the queen side where it does defend this pawn and this bishop pretty well. And this is where Magnus starts to turn up the pressure. He goes a5. The idea being, first of all, threatening a takes b6, but beyond that, even the Alpha Zero style move, a6, gaining space and restricting this bishop. Therefore, here, Nodirbek, he's having none of that. He trades on a5. B takes a5 is played in the game. All right, so far so good. Magnus recaptures. Queen takes a5 and pressures a7 a little bit. And beyond that, he's pressuring the square c7 as well. Now, Nodirbek, how should he respond? Well, his two worst placed pieces here are the knight on d7 and the rook on the f8 square. So a move like perhaps rook to c8 or d8 makes sense, as does, say, knight to b6 or f6 and so on. In the game, Nodirbek, he goes knight to f6. Not a bad move at all. And now Magnus, rook to b1, increasing the pressure slowly but surely. The idea here now, the bishop is pinned, and therefore ideas like perhaps bishop to a6 and so on could be dangerous. All right, Nodirbek, he spots this. Queen to c8 is the move, getting off the pin immediately. But of course, the drawback of this move, he is giving up this pawn on a7. However, in return, Nodirbek could win the pawn on e4, so both sides would basically even out. Now, here, in this position, Magnus makes a very thematic move for the entire semi-tirage opening. As white, if you play this as white, you simply have to know this idea right here, because if you don't, you're just never going to be able to attack properly in this opening. Here, as white, Magnus makes the move d5. Now, what is going on here? After all, black has this square covered 1, 2, 3 times. After all, black can take and then take again with the bishop or the knight, winning the pawn. So is Magnus going for a pawn sacrifice? Yes, but not this exact one. It's a little bit different. Here, black takes on d5, and of course, taking back on d5 would not be good. Black would recapture, have the extra pawn on a7, and black would be doing pretty well. Instead, Magnus goes e5. This is the key idea. We're going d5, forcing e takes, and then once black does that, the knight no longer has access to the d5 square. Then we go e5. For example, if we went e5 immediately here, then black would have access to d5 with the knight. But by going d5 first, we deflect this pawn, then go e5, and suddenly knight d5 is not possible. And this really is like white's main attacking idea, or at least main pawn break in this opening. And it works really well here as usual. All right, black. Knight e4 is the move, and Magnus captured the pawn on a7. Queen takes a7. Now he's pressuring the bishop. Again, Magnus maintaining pressure just all throughout this game. All right, black. Bishop c6, a solid move, but now rook c1. Again, Magnus is just relentless. He's not giving his opponent even one single chance to try and get back in this game. Pinning the bishop, and what should black do? Well, Nodirbek, queen to e8 is the move, defending the bishop and getting out of the pin, but this move is a little bit weak, and Magnus here, queen to a5. A solid move, trying to reroute the queen to a better square. All right, now Nodirbek, queen d7, then queen b6, bishop to a4. Of course, this piece again under attack. Bishop a4 is the move by black. And now here, Magnus, rook to c7. Magnus, again, slowly but surely, always trying to find ways to increase the pressure here on the black position. Now we have queen to f5, pressuring e5 potentially, and Magnus queen d4. And now look at this. The queen is just perfectly centralized. And look at all of white's pieces. The queen on d4, perfectly placed. The knight on f3, supporting e5. The bishop with the pin on the knight to the queen, and the rook on c7, pressuring f7, and really all the squares on the 7th rank here. So all of white's pieces are coordinating literally perfectly here. All right, Nodirbek, bishop d1, pressuring the knight on f3. For example, now the threat is taking on f3 twice with the bishop, then the queen after g takes, queen takes. So Magnus, knight to h2. He just retreats, a solid move. Now we have bishop to b3, and then f3 pressures the knight. Now here, Nodirbek plays a very, very strong idea. At first glance, it may look like, wait a minute, isn't black losing that piece? Well, here, Nodirbek goes knight to g3, with the idea being, if you take the queen, then black goes knight to e2, hitting the queen and the king, and he regains the piece. For example, bishop takes is met by knight to e2, followed by taking on d4, and black should be relatively equal here. So instead of that, Magnus goes knight to f1. A very cunning move. The point being, of course, knight e2 is not possible. That drops a piece. But beyond that, both the queen and the knight are under attack here. And Nodirbek has to move the queen somewhere else and maintain the defense of the knight. And the only square that does that is g5. So queen g5 is played here. And now, the strongest move for white is actually f4, increasing the pressure. But instead of that, Magnus goes for a completely different idea, and one that he's a big fan of, the alpha 0 move h4. Now, this pawn is supported by the queen, therefore taking on h4 is not a possibility. The queen's under attack, and the queen does have to move somewhere. But white's idea here, it's not just about pressuring the queen. This pawn is going to be an attacking piece in this game, and it's likely going to go to h5 at some point, trying to blow open the black position. So more on that in just a little bit. Now, where should the queen go? Well, in the game, queen d8 is played, not a bad move, and of course, the queen does pressure the rook on the c7 square, so a very good idea. Now, from here, white goes rook to c3. Something in my mouth there. Retreating the rook and pressuring the bishop. Now we have knight takes on f1, rook takes b3, and knight d2, pressuring the rook again. And this knight, it could be vulnerable in certain lines. Yes, it can go to c4, but beyond that, the knight could be lost in some lines, and black is going to have to be careful. All right, Magnus, he ignores the knight and instead goes rook to b5, pressuring this pawn. He knows this pawn is the key to the entire black position. If this pawn falls, then black is going to be in deep, deep trouble. And sure enough, it does. Black goes queen to c7, giving up the defense, as there's no way to further defend this pawn. The rook can't defend it. The knight can't defend it. Therefore, this pawn on d5 is lost. And Nodirbek just gives it up. And rook takes d5. And just like that, Magnus Carlsen is up a pawn, but more importantly, he has a devastating attack against the black king. For example, this pawn may go to h5, this pawn may go to e6, and black here, his king is just a sitting duck. And let's see how Magnus goes from here. All right, technically it's black's turn to move. Queen to c1 is the move, hitting the king. Now, where is the king going to go? It turns out it's going to the square f2. Now, this may look a little bit strange. After all, isn't the king vulnerable here? Well, it turns out, no, it's not. There's no good way for black to attack. And beyond that, white has sort of this blob of pieces here, plus pawns, defending the king. And overall, there's no good way to attack. For example, f1 right now is guarded by the bishop. Therefore, queen to f1 is not a possibility. All right, black, knight b3. Pressuring the queen on d4. Where's the queen going to go? It goes to e4, threatening checkmate in one move. A very powerful idea. In 1d4 openings, this is perhaps the main way white attacks in the main lines, along with the alpha 0 idea of h4. Now here, the point is, yes, black can block the attack. Yes, black can go, say, g6 blunting the attack of the queen and the bishop. But as soon as black does that, as he did in the game, this was played to stop it, and quite frankly, there really isn't a different good move. You know, f5 is just suicide, for example. So g6 was played, but the problem with this move, it just weakens so many squares around the king side. First of all, now f6 and h6 are both very, very weak, and they can be attacked sooner or later. But beyond that, of course, now if white goes h5 like this at some point later, white's going to have tremendous pressure on the pawn on g6. Now, white did not play it immediately. Instead, white played the move e6. Magnus trying to deflect this pawn away from the defense of the g-pawn. Now, of course, if black takes on e6, then queen takes g6 is the move, and black is getting checkmated in one move. King to h8, then queen to h7, and that would literally be checkmate on the spot. So black here obviously cannot take the pawn, but if he doesn't, then white takes on f7, and then g6 is hanging anyway. So what can Nodirbek possibly do to hang on here? It's not looking good. All right, Nodirbek, queen b2, hits the king on the f2 square. King to g3 is the move. And again, the king may look kind of silly on g3, but black is in no position to attack the white king. On the contrary, white is the one attacking here. All right, black, queen to f6, dropping back with the queen. And white here, he just takes on f7 with check. And what is black going to do? First of all, if you take with, say, the rook, then there's all kinds of like queen to e8 ideas and so on, and black could be in deep trouble there. Therefore, instead, black plays the move king to g7. Now, the idea behind this is simple. White cannot capture this pawn. Therefore, if black wants it, this pawn can stay there forever, and it sort of blunts the pressure as it does technically guard the king. Now, the drawback of this, of course, the rook is sort of fixed on f8, as if it does go anywhere else, then later f8 promoting to a queen could be one idea for white. So it does defend for now, but in the long run, this is just not looking good for Nodirbek. And here, Magnus makes the real AlphaZero move, h5, continuing the attack on the king side. And now this pawn on the h-file is effectively an attacking piece now. White's threatening to take on g6. And of course, if black takes here like this, then queen to h7 will be checkmate on the spot, as black's king cannot go to these squares as they're occupied by black pieces. So this is really, really not looking good for black. All right, Nodirbek, he takes on f7, rook takes. And of course, from here, Magnus has a million ideas, but he just goes for the simplest one, which is transitioning to the endgame when he's up 2 pawns. Here's how it looks. Queen takes, h takes. Of course, the pawn cannot be taken legally as the bishop controls that square. Black goes rook to c7. Now we have f4. These pawns are now rolling down the board, and what can black do to stop them? It's not looking good. Knight to c5, bishop f5, getting out of the attack. Now we have king f6, and from here, Magnus just kind of slowly steamrolls from here. Attacking h6, black defends, white goes g4, gaining more space, black retreats. Now we have g5, h takes, and then king takes. White now has these 2 pawns, 2 connected pass pawns, and of course, white's idea is simple. Sooner or later, perhaps going here, then f5, f5, f6, and once that pawn gets to f6, it is going to be curtains for black. So, let's see how it looks. Here, Magnus just playing with his prey. He knows he is in no hurry. All he has to do is find the best possible way to go f5 later, then f6, and once he does, like this, it is effectively all over here. Nodirbek, he knows if you allow f6, that is just GG. Therefore, he takes on f5, Magnus takes back, and in this position, Nodirbek, he simply resigns on the spot to Magnus Carlsen, being down the bishop and the pawn. Now, very importantly, if white did not have this pawn right here, the game would technically be drawn, theoretically, in theory, black can draw with the rook versus the rook and the bishop. However, with the extra pawn, there is just no chance, and white is just completely winning here. So Nodirbek making the right call. The computer gives mate in 11 moves here. So Very impressive stuff by the world champion, playing just a beautiful, beautiful attacking game in the semi-tirage with knight to c3 and then c5. A lot of grandmasters think this line for white is just not good these days due to the line c takes, then c takes d4, queen takes, e takes. But to be honest, even here, white is winning game after game, especially Magnus. And beyond that, if you go into the database and look at the move e3 here, again, white is just winning game after game after game at the GM level in the database with this move right here. So to be honest, I personally think the semi-tirage, while it's a solid opening for black, it's quite risky from a practical standpoint, as white seems to have the easier game after either taking on d5 or going e3. And while black in theory should be okay, defending in a real game between two players is a completely different matter. But that is my personal opinion right here. So I think this line is still quite good for white, and it's cool to see Magnus still busting out knight c3 and playing against semi-tirage in a very principled way. So anyways, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, show me some love, smash that like button, and comment down below what you thought of this game. And by the way, I do have a paid chess community. If you want to learn directly from me, learn my exact opening systems, I'm going to have middle game courses in the future and so on. If you want to be able to DM me and get answers to your questions, join my group coaching calls and so on, the link is down below in the description for the video, as well as the pinned comment to the video. So check it out. You won't regret it. There's a 7-day free trial, so you can try it risk-free. So check it out. And as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And I'll see you in the next video.